You're watching VinylicPumaGaming. What's up, guys? So today I wanted to discuss what I think is the best faction to choose or side with in Fallout 4. I'm going to be discussing the various perks of joining each organization from mostly a quasi-tactical based perspective for survival mode. While I will mention the morality of each of the factions, I will be recommending these factions mostly based on the perks that they provide. I will also be including the major DLC factions from both the Far Harbor and the NUKA World DLCs as well. And before we get into this video, it's important to mention that to a certain extent, one faction may or may not be the best for your playstyle. One faction might provide better perks or weapons and armor for how you play the game, while the other faction might not. You may also decide to pick a certain faction based on how you roleplay, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm picking my choices here because I believe these factions to be the best choices for the easiest time in survival mode. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with the vanilla game factions. Just to warn you, I might surprise you with my recommendation. So from Fallout 4's vanilla game, you have the Brotherhood of Steel, the Minutemen, the Institute, and the Railroad. The Brotherhood provides the player with a VERTIBIRD signal grenade earlier on than the Railroad does, which is going to allow you to fast travel in survival difficulty. However, if you're planning on siding with another faction later on, you can take advantage of the Brotherhood of Steel until towards like the end of the game. You can also join the Minutemen, do the Minutemen ending, and still have access to VERTIBIRDS. The Brotherhood also allow you to obtain T60 armor fairly early, and while you don't have very many Brotherhood-specific settlements, you can always use the Minutemen or NUKA World Raiders for settlement building. And another nice thing about the Brotherhood is that you get access to unique T60 armor pieces by completing their side quests, and if you go far enough into their quest line, you can get a free T60 medic pump and a T60 jetpack. Both of these are nice if you don't have a high science perk. You can also get the X111 compound, which will instantly heal RADS in survival mode and can be quite useful if you're in a pinch. The Brotherhood does have its downsides, though. Many of the perks I've mentioned can be used before you have to ally with a specific faction for the end of the game. So, for example, VERTIBIRDS can be used as long as you don't make the Brotherhood of Steel hostile. Plus, the faction's main companion, Paladin Dance, ends up leaving the Brotherhood of Steel during the Blind Betrayal sidequest mission. So, if you side with the Brotherhood towards the end of the game, you lose your faction companion. Some of the unique items that you get later on aren't as amazing, and a lot of the good Brotherhood uniques are acquired upon joining their faction. So, for example, something like the Righteous Authority laser rifle is going to be better than the Sentinel's plasma caster. The thing is that the instigating effect on the Sentinel's plasma caster would work better on a silenced weapon as opposed to being on a plasma caster, and the plasma caster would probably benefit from like a rapid legendary effect or something else. Now, if role-playing is important to you, you may also take issue with the Brotherhood ending, as it is fairly severe. Then there is the Commonwealth Minutemen. Within the first hour of the game, the Minutemen's first quest provides you with access to T45 power armor. While this is the weakest of the standard power armor models, it's useful for your first couple of levels, and assuming you know where all of the fusion cores are early on, I could see you easily using this armor until level 13 or so when T51 becomes available. Another nice perk of the Minutemen is their artillery cannons for settlements. The nice thing is that both of these can be acquired regardless of what ending you ultimately choose, and they are some of the Minutemen's most positive features. The one unique thing about the Minutemen, though, is Preston GARVEY as a companion. Provided you equip him with better weapons and armor, he actually has one of the better companion perks in the game, and it is a perk called United We Stand, and it boosts damage resistance by plus 20, which isn't that great, but it allows you to deal an additional 20% damage when you are quote-unquote outnumbered, and this is defined by the game as having 3 or more opponents fighting you at once. So it might be worth worth it for you to max out Preston's affinity. The problem with the Minutemen is that you can side with the Institute, Brotherhood, or Railroad and receive most, if not all, of the benefits that the Minutemen provide. The Minutemen also provide a limited set of exceptional unique weapons and armor from quests and vendors, and for this reason, it might actually be a good idea to remain allied with the Minutemen if possible, but not totally complete their quest line. I would say once you get the castle, you should attempt to choose one of the other 3 of the factions in the game. There's also the Institute. The Institute allows the player to travel from anywhere in the Commonwealth back to the Institute. Now, on the one hand, this ability is quite nice, as it allows you to travel from a very central location on the map. Unfortunately, the Institute's teleporter doesn't allow them to fast travel anywhere on the map, like you sort of can with the Brotherhood or Railroad VERTIBIRDS. This is a shame, as having the ability to teleport anywhere would make the Institute a phenomenal choice for a faction. Another issue that I have with the Institute is their faction companion, X688. While he definitely looks cool, his companion perk at max affinity is pretty weak. Shield Harmonics boosts energy resistance by +20, and you'll find that this is almost negligible depending on how you've built your character. Ultimately, I would say this companion perk is among one of the least ideal perks in Fallout 4. The Institute is also not a settlement-based faction, so you've also got to consider that you're going to have to keep the Minutemen around for that as well. The Institute ending also wipes out the Brotherhood and Railroad, and that is a guarantee, but you also have the potential to wipe out the Minutemen too. And while this may be cool from a roleplay perspective, I ultimately think preserving the Brotherhood or Railroad is going to be more useful, especially if you're concerned with a safer form of travel. Plus, you still get the Minutemen with both of those factions being around, where you may not have this opportunity if you chose the Institute. And finally, there is the Railroad. The Railroad eventually acquires the VERTIBIRD signal grenade, however, it is after their version of nuclear options. So once you take out the Institute and the Brotherhood of Steel, you will get access to their VERTIBIRD signal grenades. Presumably, you could continue to use Brotherhood VERTIBIRDS until you ultimately decide to betray them for the Railroad, and then you could complete all the Railroad quests and get this functionality back. The Railroad also has access to some really nice stealth weapons, like the Deliverer, and you can also buy the Tinker Tom Special if you're so inclined to do that. If you don't use power armor, you can also acquire the Ballistic Weave mod, which improves the armor rating of various pieces of clothing. Deacon is also a good companion for stealth characters. Deacon's Cloak and Dagger boosts sneak attack damage and makes stealth boys last 40% longer. This is going to be useful if you're constantly using silencers to deal with various enemies throughout Fallout 4. Otherwise, the Railroad's ending is slightly less severe, as it does result in the destruction of the Brotherhood of Steel and the Institute, but I would say of the 4 endings, it is the second highest good karma ending, with the Minutemen ending being the highest karma ending in my opinion. Now, the question is, which vanilla game faction is going to be the winner here? Now, I know some of you guys are going to be upset, so I'm going to apologize in advance, but I'm actually going to place my bets on the Railroad. Now, that said, the Minutemen is going to be an extremely close second, or you could even argue that it's going to be a tie, depending on your playstyle. The determining factor here is going to be whether you want to use power armor or not, and whether you plan on using weapons with silencers or not. I would say if you don't use power armor and you're using silencers, you should go with the Railroad. Otherwise, stick with the Brotherhood, as they have access to good power armor pieces and various other good weapons. And as I've mentioned previously, both factions can be allied with the Minutemen, so you should be able to complete most of the Minutemen quest line up to the castle, and then you can join either the Railroad or Brotherhood from there. I would say the big thing in my decision was Deacon versus Paladin Dance. Of the two, I think we can all agree that Deacon is going to be a more useful companion, and you'll find that Deacon's Cloak and Dagger perk is better than Dance's Know Your Enemy perk. You also have to consider that you'll have access to Deacon throughout the entire game, while that's not the case for Paladin Dance. But simultaneously, if you're not playing a stealth character, you may find you prefer a companion both from another faction as well as one that isn't allied to any faction. So for example, you could join the Brotherhood and then use PRESTON GARVEY. I would ultimately say that if you choose the Railroad or the Brotherhood, you're getting the best perks for travel, and those VERTIBIRD signal grenades and survival are extremely important. As for the worst faction to choose, I think it's clearly the Institute. At least with the Minutemen, you can use the VERTIBIRDS that the Brotherhood has if you ally with them, but in comparison, the Institute's teleportation ability is lame. It would be one thing if you could teleport all around the map, but you're currently stuck teleporting back to the Institute. From there, you're forced to walk across the map to get anywhere. And I also think X688 is a bad companion as he has a bad perk. Shield Harmonics just isn't as good as either Deacon's Cloak and Dagger or Preston's United We Stand. And I would even say that Dance's Know Your Enemy perk is more practical than X688's Shield Harmonics perk. Keep in mind too that you're getting access to the Minutemen anyway, and actually for the Institute, you run the risk of destroying the Minutemen, which may be something you don't even want to do. So I think for the reasons that I just stated, I can't really recommend the Institute. And just to recap, our winners are going to be the Railroad or Brotherhood, with our loser being the Institute. Okay, so now on to Fallout 4's Far Harbor DLC. Unlike the main questline from Fallout 4 Vanilla, this DLC's ending is much more open. Ultimately, you can either save or destroy Acadia, while also either saving or destroying Far Harbor and the Children of Adam at the Nucleus. So, before we get into perks, let's discuss the Brotherhood and Institute endings. As far as I'm able to tell, neither of these endings result in the acquisition of any perks, so it might be best to not inform either faction if you are allied with them. That way, you can still acquire some of the perks here. So now let's discuss the Children of Adam. Quest-wise, you can get some pretty decent weapons and armors with this faction. You can get access to the Radical Conversion, the Adam's Judgment, the Adam's Bulwark, and the Inquistor's Cowl. If you help the Children of Adam during the Cleansing the Land quest, you get access to the Crusader and Inquisitor of Adam perks, which both boost your weapon damage the more rads you have. It's about an additional 10% damage boost for every 100 rads. Now, it doesn't matter whether you get the Crusader or Inquisitor perk, as both are essentially the same thing. Overall, the general trend with the Children of Adam is that both their faction gear and perks rely on the player having accrued a significant amount of radiation damage. You may find this is great for sneak builds as a means of further increasing your damage with certain weapons. However, if you're a melee character and you're going to be taking a lot of damage, you may not want to have a lot of rads. Also, in order to get the Crusader of Adam perk, you have to wipe out Far Harbor, and this does make Old Longfellow hostile, so you've got to consider if you want Old Longfellow as a companion, and then make your choices based off of that. Now, during the Far Harbor DLC, you can also decide whether you want to destroy Acadia or not. If you decide to destroy Acadia, it's highly recommended that you do so with Alan Lee and Far Harbor. Otherwise, you won't be gaining access to the Destroyer of Acadia perk. This perk is very powerful as it quadruples your damage output if your health goes below 20%, and this effect lasts about 30 seconds, and it might go well with armor pieces that bear the martyr effect, so that way you can also slow down time as well. From a roleplay perspective, it's worth mentioning that if you do destroy Acadia with Alan Lee, you risk killing KASUMI NAKANO in the process. So if you decide to destroy Acadia, you don't save KASUMI. Alternatively, you can choose to protect or spare Acadia. You can even go as far as allying with them and helping Dima to replace High Confessor Tectus with a synth body double during the Reformation quest. If you do replace or get rid of Tectus, you will receive the Protector of Acadia perk, and instead of quadrupling damage, you gain plus 1000 damage and energy resistance. Otherwise, it functions in a very similar way to the Destroyer of Acadia perk. That said, according to the Fallout wiki, this perk is apparently buggy. And finally, there's Far Harbor. If you defeat the Children of Atom, you gain the Far Harbor Survivalist perk, which boosts all resistances by +5. And the nice thing about the Far Harbor faction is that you can obtain most of their good perks by helping out the citizens. Once you get what you want, you can ultimately choose to destroy them later. Far Harbor is also your major settlement faction, so it's recommended that you pick them, or at the very least, do all of the settlement-related side quest. This will allow you to acquire the otherwise unobtainable Dalton Farm, Echo Lake Lumber, and National Park Visitor Center. If you wipe out Far Harbor before acquiring these settlements, you won't be able to get these later, so keep that in mind. Far Harbor is also home to the Far Harbor DLC's only companion, Old Longfellow. Honestly, his unique perk isn't 100% incredible or anything, as it just reduces damage and energy resistance on animals and sea creatures. This is nice for hunting purposes, but it's not particularly useful for much else. Now that we've gone over all of the factions, what would I say is your best choice? The perks for choosing Far Harbor or the Children of Atom are fairly negligible. However, I think the most important thing is whether you want to destroy Acadia or not. While it's definitely evil, destroying Acadia yields a very powerful perk for combat. The ability to quadruple your damage for 30 seconds is insanely powerful, and you may find that this perk is a lot more useful than the Protector of Acadia perk, which is apparently somewhat buggy. That said, you do get access to Acadia's shield, which is a pretty decent synth chess piece, if you do decide to help Dima and keep his secrets. The big thing to remember here is that you can pretty much do all of the quests for both Far Harbor and the Children of Atom before betraying one or the other. It's also recommended that you acquire all purchasable weapons before either deactivating the wind turbines or blowing up the nucleus. But if I did have to pick one of the two from that point on, it's probably going to be the Children of Atom. The fact is that while neither Far Harbor Survivalist or Crusader of Atom as perks are amazing, Crusader of Atom is better. +5 to resistances is so minuscule when you consider that decent armor sets provide 4 times that in most cases. What I would recommend you do is play through Far Harbor, and when you get to the way life should be, you should convince Far Harbor to attack Acadia. That way, you can get the Destroyer of Acadia perk, which will greatly boost your damage output in tight situations. From there, you should then activate the Wind Turbine kill switch to wipe out Far Harbor, thus achieving the Crusader of Atom perk. If you've done everything correctly, you should have access to all of the settlements on Far Harbor, most if not all of the unique weapons and armor, as well as the best of the perks that you can acquire from the DLC. While you'll lose Old Longfellow as a companion, there are better companions for the player to choose anyway. As far as the worst choice goes, I think I'm going to have to say that it's both the Brotherhood or Institute endings for Acadia. Both of these endings prevent you from getting either the Protector or Destroyer of Acadia perks. You're better off not involving either faction, and while it may be cool from a roleplay perspective to have the Brotherhood or Institute soldiers attack Acadia, your character doesn't get any stronger. So regardless of whatever you decide to choose, make sure you don't pick the Brotherhood or Institute endings. Now with Far Harbor out of the way, it's time we discussed what we should do in the NUKA World DLC. Despite this DLC's size, it's arguably less complex than Far Harbor is. Essentially, you're going to either play through the DLC and have one of the raider gangs betray you, or you're going to have to liberate all of the slaves of NUKA World by killing all of the raiders. Let's go over all 3 raider gangs and their benefits. The operators provide the player with the Ace Operator perk, which improves stealth while in shadows and allows you to deal 25% more damage with silenced weapons. The Disciples will provide the player with the Chosen Disciple perk, which will allow for kills with melee weapons to restore action points. And finally, the Pack will provide the player with the Pack Alpha perk, which improves damage resistance by 25%, and you will deal 25% more damage with both melee and unarmed attacks. All three factions have their own unique faction grenades, which can be acquired before power play, which is the mission where one of the three gangs betrays you. And remember, you can get 2 of these perks, and it's based on which of the 2 factions that like you the most. If you want my opinion, just pick 2 of these factions and ignore the third by allocating no territory to that third gang. The other option is to kill all of the raiders as a part of the open season side quest. This prevents you from acquiring any of the faction-based perks, and you also lose the Wasteland Warrior perk as well. You also lose access to Porter Gage. Gage provides you with the Lessons in Blood perk, which is basically going to provide you with 5% more XP per kill, and also gives you plus 10 to damage resistance. Provided you destroy all of the raiders really early on, you can preserve the original Minutemen-based settlement mode, and this may be a perk to you if you don't like the raiders or the raider settlement building mode. As much as it pains me to say it, in my opinion, the best case scenario here is going to be to side with the Nuka World Raider gangs. As for which gangs you choose, I'd recommend the Operators in the pack for ranged characters and the Disciples in the pack for melee characters. Whatever you do, don't let the pack betray you, as the perk that they provide is arguably the best of the 3. 25% damage resistance is very useful and will help you from taking insane amounts of damage going forward. Ultimately, I think melee characters benefit the most from siding with the raiders, as choosing the Disciples in pack will yield the most benefits. At the same time, the Disciples' ability to boost damage with silenced weapons is nothing to sneeze at. The issue is that if you like to use certain companions like PRESTON or DEACON, you're probably not going to be able to use them during raids of settlements. Even worse, PRESTON and GARVEY will begin to disown you for helping the raiders, as he probably should. Sadly, the worst case scenario is going to be overthrowing the raiders. By doing this, you lose all of the really good perks that you can acquire from each gang. You also lose the ability to build raider-based settlements, and you also lose Porter Gage, which may or may not be that big of a deal to you. On the one hand, it's a tough choice, because if you've already heavily invested into settlement building, you're probably not going to want to side with the Nuka World Raiders. On the other hand, if you don't side with the Nuka World Raiders, you don't really get any good perks for doing so. All you get is simply the feeling that you did the right thing, which may be important to you from a roleplay perspective, but it's not that great from a gameplay perspective. So I guess to recap all of our choices throughout this entire video, I'm going to recommend the Brotherhood or Railroad for the vanilla game. For the Far Harbor DLC, I am going to recommend that you betray Acadia using Far Harbor, and then you betray Far Harbor for the Children of Adam, and then for Nuka World, siding with the Raiders and choosing either the Operators in the pack for ranged characters and the Disciples in the pack for melee-based characters is going to be your best choices there. This way, you should be getting the best collection of weapons in Fallout 4, and you should be getting access to some of the game's most useful perks. Alright guys, that's going to pretty much wrap up this particular video. If you like this video, please be sure to leave a like, and as always, take care, and I'll see y'all next time.